crack it on at 10, and then I'll record this at 10:05. My God, the semester's almost over.
Oh.
It's gotta be a good thing. Here comes Her Royal Highness. No studying for anatomy in this class. I know your exam's tomorrow. So, Cancer Bio is confirmed. It's going to be a fully online class. You never have to once see my face. And it's going to be an easy class, no prerequisites, right? So it's got to be super easy. And you have a quiz every week that you take online, and then you have a paper due at the end of the term, at the end of the 8-week term. It's an 8-week class in the summer, and nursing loves that class because it's pretty clinical. Okay, so feel free to sign up. It gets really full really fast, particularly in the summer with all the high schoolers. Okay, so sign up for it early if you need to. Okay, this thing has full battery every time. Something's wrong. Something's working at Ohlone. That can't be right. I must be at Chabot. Okay. One more minute now. Already? I haven't even started.
It's a long day today.
My younger one was asking me about BU.
Really? I think it's a good school. I'd recommend it. What
It's a great school.
What major is he going to go for?
He's like 5.
Oh, never mind.
No, he's into biotech.
100% recommend that.
Yeah, I think, except it's hell expensive.
Yeah, as long as you get like the scholarship.
You see how brown I am? Yeah, not happening.
I mean, as long as he gets the scholarship, it's fine.
The boy will go work at Target. Oh, here come the lovebirds. Come sit. You just missed Angry Birds. You must have seen him tweet out of here. Ah, there it is. All right, open up your digestive notes. I'm going to fly through this now. Can I start? Okay. All right. So digestive is a very, very fun system. It is very straightforward and compared to all the other systems because the anatomy is really straightforward. The digestive tract starts from the mouth, ends in the anus. It's a 21-foot long tube in everybody. It doesn't matter how tall or short you are. It's 21 feet long. And the architecture is really conserved, okay? In other words, the tube is pretty straightforward. I mean, it has a very set job, and it gets that job done in a very simple way. So that makes the physiology of this not so complicated, okay? However, there is still cell transport involved, there is still mechanisms involved. We're going to be looking at neural mechanisms, we're going to be looking at secretory mechanisms, we're going to be looking at digestive mechanisms and transport mechanisms. Very much done. I'll finish this today. Okay, I'll probably get through 30% of this today. So, like I said before, I will do the review for cardiovascular first thing tomorrow morning. You should have that hopefully by noon tomorrow. So look for it under weekly reviews that Shiva posts. Okay, so I should be able to get mine up by then, okay? So food we eat is a mix of complicated molecules, okay? And the principle, the working principle of how all this works is we eat the food, okay? The food gets digested, which means it's chemically broken down by enzymes. Enzymes will break this down, and then you break it down, and then you take in all the basic molecules. I'll give you an analogy that helps a lot. Interesting, because when I taught this to my younger one, when he took A&P last summer, he came up with this analogy. I thought it was really brilliant. So it's like he's really into Legos. So it's like I give him a built Lego, right? And he wants to make something else out of it, right? So it's a built Lego of, I don't know, let's say the Egyptian Sphinx or something, right? And he wants to build the Taj Mahal, right? So what does he need to do? He has to break it all down into individual bricks, correct? And then use that to build whatever he wants. So that's how this process works. So the food we eat is something totally different. So what do? You break it down to the basic units, the basic macromolecules, absorb it, and then build whatever you want with it. Everybody got that?
Yes.
And important also to understand that the inside of the GI tract is technically outside of the body. So from the mouth to the anus, the lumen of the GI tube is considered external to the body. Okay? So another good analogy for this would be a pile of whole donuts, right? H-O-L-E, whole donuts. So imagine donuts with a hole, right? If you pile them up, it forms a tube, right? The inside tube is technically air, right? There's nothing in there.
Yes.
Right? So that's how a GI tube needs to be visualized. So we do what's called extracellular digestion. We do extracellular digestion. Our digestion happens outside of the body. Okay?
Yes.
And then we absorb whatever we want back into the body. Is this principle understood?
Yes.
Yes.
Everybody? Okay. So typically you have two main sets of organs. You have the GI tube itself, and then you have what's called accessory organs. Okay? Accessory organs aid in digestion. Okay? And interesting, the GI tube has direct contact with the food, whereas the accessory organs don't. Okay? So again, as we go through everything, you'll kind of see the pattern of these things. So very quickly, functions of the digestive system. So what does the digestive system do? We ingest the food. Ingest means taking food in. Okay. So you chew into an apple, or you eat a sandwich, right? You're taking food in. That's ingestion. There's lots and lots of secretion, and you can see secretion right from the mouth, right? You have saliva being secreted into the mouth, and then you have many digestive secretions happen. In the stomach, for instance, you secrete acid and enzymes and other proteins, and then of course intestine, right, is where most of the digestion happens there. And then you have water, acid, buffers, and enzymes. They're all secreted. And we're going to be looking at the mechanism of each one of these things in detail. Okay? You normally, when you think digestion, people think, ingestion, everything from taking food in to the end of defecation. They think that's digestion. No, it's not. Digestion is a very specific process, and there are two types of digestion. There is mechanical digestion, which is breaking up of food into smaller and smaller pieces. That increases surface area. Okay? So when you break food down to smaller and smaller pieces, you will increase surface area. And mechanical digestion happens throughout the GI tract. It's not just in the mouth. It happens throughout the GI tract. Starting with the mouth, all the way to the anus, you have mechanical digestion. And mechanical digestion doesn't always just include tearing or breaking of the food. Anywhere you have smooth muscle in the GI tract, you're going to be doing some kind of mechanical digestion. Okay, churning of the food in the stomach, for example, is also mechanical digestion. Are we clear? So those are all parts of mechanical digestion. And then you got chemical breakdown of the food. Okay, and this is truly what digestion means. Okay, is using water to break down food. Water is extremely important. Water is what breaks food down. Okay, the digestion lab that we're going to do in lab, it's a wet lab, it involves water, and you're going to see all those details there. We're going to be doing that lab most likely not next week, but the week after. But next week you have an exam on cardiovascular, right? So we're only going to do blood and urine analysis. Okay, so please come to lab ready to pee. Okay, keep your bladder full when you come to lab. You're going to analyze your own pee. And why is that confusing? You're going to pee in a tube and then you analyze it. Nothing complicated there. Okay, so chemical breakdown is hydrolysis. I need you to know this word. Chemical breakdown of food is hydrolysis. Hydrolysis. Hydrolysis means breaking food down using water. Okay, so you remove water when you make big molecules, so you add water to break it down to smaller molecules. Okay, so the breakdown of food happens with water. This is why when you're dehydrated, you become constipated, because you don't digest properly. Okay, people usually think water is needed for lubrication, right? It is, no argument there. But I promise you, you will not digest or absorb anything properly if you're not drinking enough water. So if you don't drink water for long periods of time, for months, okay, your digestion is going to be severely compromised. Are we clear? Because all chemical digestion is going to be hydrolysis reactions, okay? And they're all catalyzed by enzymes. We have specific enzymes that will catalyze each of these reactions. You're going to physically see them in 2 weeks when we do the digestion lab. Most important, absorption. You absorb whatever is valuable. Now, I have to really mention something here. Digested food, when you break down into smaller molecules, you need to absorb them across into blood and lymph. Fat gets absorbed into lymph. Fat gets absorbed into lymph, and lymph gets dumped in the heart. So when people eat fatty foods, the first place fat goes to is your heart vessels. This is why people who eat fatty food all the time get blocked heart vessels, because the first place that fat sees, okay, after digestion and after the liver cleans it up, is the heart. Okay, the lymphatic system delivers it to the thoracic duct delivers it straight into the heart. Okay, so very important. Everything else is absorbed directly into blood. Carbohydrates, amino acids, they all get absorbed into blood, and fat gets absorbed into the lymph. This is very, very selective. Okay, and it really depends on what your nutritional state is, right? So depending on what your nutritional state is, you regulate how much of what's getting absorbed, okay? And we're going to see those mechanisms as well. Lastly, defecation. Defecation is elimination. We wrongly call it excrement. We only have 1 or 2 types of excrement in the body. One is sweat. Sweat's an excrement. Urine is an excrement. Okay? Feces is not excrement. It's an elimination product. Okay, there is a big difference, because excrement means metabolic waste, something that you have created. Okay, that's an excrement. Defecation is elimination. It's material you cannot digest. It's material that you could not digest, is gotten rid of by the body. Are we clear? That is not considered excretion. Okay, excretion, feces is not excretion. Very, very important. It's elimination. Don't make that mistake. Okay, and this is all schematically shown in this diagram. Okay, so again, you have ingestion, so that's obviously the mouth. You have secretion of materials, and secretion happens throughout this tube. Secretion happens throughout. Okay, the only place you really actually may not see much secretion is maybe the anus, but secretion happens everywhere in the tube. Okay, and you have digestion, and then you have absorption, and then elimination. Okay, so it's a really neat diagram from Tortora. Really good diagram that I like. So it summarizes the whole thing. What did I just do? Alright, well, let's just stop this thing. Okay, great, now it's frozen. Notability is driving me crazy. Okay, so GI tract, we are going to do a little bit of anatomy because anatomy is relevant. It's very important for understanding the physiology part of this. So GI tract has a basic architecture that's conserved. In other words, this tube from the mouth to the anus has a very fundamentally similar structure. It's really not that different. Okay, so from deep to superficial, meaning the innermost part of the tube to the outermost part of the tube, we have the lumen. The lumen is the hollow of the tube. So everybody imagine this, you have the lumen. And then covering the lumen is what we call mucosa. Mucosa covers the lumen. And then mucosa is 99% in the body, anywhere. Mucosa is epithelial linings, okay? Mucosa is almost always epithelium, okay? And then mucosa is surrounded by the submucosa. Most of the time, the submucosa varies depending on the organ. It could be glands, for example, in the stomach, submucosa has a lot of glands, okay? But submucosa can have other components to it. Surrounded by a fairly thick layer of muscularis. Muscularis is muscle. Now, this also varies, okay? You will see that majority of the GI tract, the muscularis is single unit smooth muscle. It is single unit smooth muscle, okay? But in other parts, for example, the esophagus, you can actually see skeletal muscle there as well, okay? So there is a little bit of a difference there. And then finally, you have the serosa. Serosa is the set of outer membranes that cover the tube. Okay? So again, you take the GI tube, any part of the GI tube, you're going to have these four main layers. Okay? So these are all described here. These are all anatomical details. I do not need you to know these. I've left them there for reference. I'm not going to ask you what exactly is the mucosa made of. Is it keratinized? Is it not keratinized? That's all stuff you do, you're supposed to do in anatomy. I'm not going to cover that, okay? So if you're interested, look it up in my anatomy videos I've given you. Watch them if you want to learn all these. I'm not going to test you on any of this. So when you take notes, note down things you do not need to know, okay? So all these anatomical details you don't need to know, okay? So I'm going to jump right into well, I want to talk just a little bit about muscularis because physiologically this is very important. Like I said, we're dealing primarily with single unit smooth muscle, but wherever you have any voluntary activities, like for instance swallowing, right? The swallowing reflex is actually skeletal muscle because swallowing is voluntary, right? It has to be mediated by somatic nervous system, okay? And also the external anal sphincter is also voluntary, and typically the external anal sphincter and the internal anal sphincter are both smooth muscles in infants. When babies are born, it's uncontrolled. This is why babies poop without any control, right? That's why they need diapers. But once you're quote unquote potty trained, the potty training physiologically refers to the conversion of the external anal sphincter from being smooth muscle to skeletal muscle. So when it becomes skeletal muscle, the child now has control of defecation. Does that make sense? Because it's voluntary. And skeletal muscle forms that sphincter. The rest of the GI tract, it is single unit smooth muscle. And usually you have two layers. This becomes very important physiologically. Okay? You have two layers. You've got circular layer, okay, and that goes around in circles. And then you have longitudinal layer. Now the circular and longitudinal layers are perpendicular to each other. Okay? The circular and longitudinal layers are perpendicular to each other. And anytime you have this kind of an arrangement, okay, and you're going to see this again in the urinary system, whenever you have this kind of a perpendicular arrangement, you're dealing with peristalsis. P for perpendicular, P for peristalsis. Peristalsis is defined as rhythmic squeezing. Rhythmic squeezing. So you squeeze, expand. You squeeze, expand. You squeeze, expand. And material goes right through. Okay? So that kind of rhythmic squeezing is very important in the digestive tract, and we're going to see the mechanisms that make this possible. Okay? And because this is smooth muscle, it is going to be innervated by sympathetic nervous system, parasympathetic nervous system, right? So you are going to have these neurons coming in, and we have yet another nervous system here, which we never talked about, called the enteric nervous system. GI is so complicated that it evolved its own nervous system, completely on its own, okay? It has its own dedicated nervous system called enteric nervous system. So we have what's called, there are two plexi, okay? And again, these will become important when we do mechanisms of, short and long reflexes. It's going to become important there, so you do need to know the name. We have two plexi, and plexi is the plural for plexus. And plexus simply means network. We have two plexi of nerves that coordinate all these movements. One is called the submucosal plexus. Submucosal plexus. We're going to talk about all that. It's in my notes. Submucosal plexus. And then we have the myenteric plexus. Myo means muscle. Okay, so myenteric plexus. The myenteric plexus is very, very strong because it is innervating a fairly thick layer of smooth muscle. Okay? The submucosal plexus is very thin, it's very gentle, because that's what causes squeezing of the food. Make sense? So if you're churning your food, the submucosal plexus will force the food to come in touch with the epithelium. Make sense? So that's quite gentle because the layer is not that thick. But myenteric plexus is a fairly thick, it's innervating a fairly thick layer of smooth muscle. Okay? The muscularis externi. Okay, and once I show you the diagram, it will make a lot more sense. Okay? The serosa is just a protective membrane. I'm not gonna. Okay? So that's not that important. So here is a quick representative diagram. You need to know very little from here, but knowing the structure of the GI tube is very, very helpful in understanding the mechanisms of how GI works. Okay? So again, here start with the lumen. So here's the lumen, right? Here's your lumen, the hollow of a tube, and then this layer of epithelium. Okay, right here. This is basically your mucosa, okay? And here is your muscularis mucosae. That is also single unit smooth muscle. That is also single unit smooth muscle, okay? And notice how thin this is, right? Then you have your submucosal layer, okay, which is mostly connective tissue, okay? And then look at the muscularis externi. Look at how thick that is, yeah? Myenteric plexus goes in here. So this is your myenteric plexus right here. That's your myenteric plexus. Anything yellow is neurons. Okay? And the submucosal plexus is not shown. It's shown here. Okay? So this is fairly thin, and look at how thick this is. Yes, because you need that level of innervation. And you have your mesentery, which is not that important. Okay, so don't worry about that. Again, mostly I want you to concentrate on the muscle, the muscularis, the submucosal muscularis there, muscularis mucosae, and muscularis externi. Okay, I want you to really focus on those because they're going to become important later. The enteric nervous system is 100 million neurons, nothing to scoff at. Okay, it is a significant system. Okay, so there is no surprise that clinical depression can be caused by the GI tract. Okay? Stress eating. Okay, when people stress eat, that is trying to calm any kind of anxiety by stimulating the enteric nervous system, and that cannot be a good thing. Does that make sense? If it's done inappropriately, it cannot be a good thing. Okay? So it's very important to understand that the brain-gut connection is tremendous. In fact, the most recent finding in 2026 seems to be that the gut composition, okay, your gut composition, which is, people say you are what you eat, okay? This was said long time ago, right, by ancient peoples, okay? And many people don't understand what that means, right? And they just scoff at it and go, old people, what do they know? Turns out it's absolutely true, okay? The beginnings of Parkinson's, the beginnings of Alzheimer's, beginnings of dementia, okay? Beginnings of bipolar disorder all appear to have a connection to the microbiotic environment in the stomach. Okay? When these bacteria mutate, okay, they have the ability to produce these type of diseases, or at least affect these type of diseases in the future. Does that make sense? Which also explains why, if you don't floss your teeth or if you don't brush your teeth properly, okay, the risk for these diseases double or triple. Okay, so if you're not brushing and flossing twice a day, that is associated with all of these brain plaques. Does that make sense? And heart plaques, and that makes sense because bacteria, there are tons of bacteria in your mouth. Okay, so understand that bacteria are living with us, right? Because the inside of our body is outside of the body, right, technically. So making sure that these bacteria remain healthy, okay, is very, very important. Okay, one of the best things to do is to have these triple biotics that they sell, which seem to be really safe. I've been taking them for a year now because as soon as I started Ozempic, my digestive system went crazy. Okay, so these triple biotics are very, very helpful. Okay, I feel like they're, and you can get a decent one, and all you need to do is take one a day, right? And it replenishes a lot of your bacteria. If you don't want to do that, just take a cup of yogurt, plain yogurt without any sugar, right? Add a little salt and eat it. That has tons of probiotics and prebiotics that you need. Okay, but making sure that your biotic environment is healthy in your GI tract seems to have a lot of impact on cardiovascular and mental diseases. Okay, particularly degenerative diseases. Are we clear? Hello?
Yes.
Okay, so we have 100 million neurons, nothing to ignore, okay? It's a significant network, and it's so significant that we call it by its own nervous system name. It's an enteric nervous system, okay? Just like central nervous system, peripheral nervous system, you have enteric nervous system, okay? There are two main neural plexes. You've got myenteric and submucosal, and I've already gone over this. The myenteric plexus controls major motility of the GI tract, okay? Peristalsis, and we're going to see this again. There's another movement called segmentation. So segmentation and peristalsis is controlled by the myenteric plexus. The submucosal plexus helps push the epithelial cells to the food and makes sure that the food contacts the epithelial cells really effectively, okay? And the interneurons connect the two plexes, okay? And sensory neurons can sense stretch. So if you eat a lot, or your stomach's distended, or your intestine is distended, that's sensed by neurons, right? And we have chemo and mechanoreceptors abundantly distributed all over the place. So this is kind of summarized by this diagram right here. And again, from Tortora, all of my diagrams are from Tortora. It's a great book. Too bad it's too expensive. So you have these kinds of connections, right? And notice everything connects to ANS and the central nervous system. Okay? That connection is super important. Okay? And we're going to be talking about reflexes that connect to the brain. The brain controls these reflexes. For example, you feel super hungry, right? But you're in the middle of a lab exam. Okay? Well, you can't get out. And you can't grab food in the middle of the lab, right? You can't do that. So your brain tells your gut, Okay, hush, okay? We'll eat soon enough, okay? I have to finish this exam. So that alone is proof that your central nervous system controls the enteric nervous system. And vice versa, right? When you eat certain types of food, right? For instance, let's say that if you eat very spicy food, that you're going to get acid reflux, right? That is another way your central nervous system brings things from memory, saying that don't eat this, it's going to hurt you, right? It's going to make you very uncomfortable or sick, okay? So those kinds of interactions. Also, when the stomach is really full and you just ate quote unquote comfort food, right? That is your stomach comforting your brain. Make sense? And there's a very thin line there between comfort food and food addiction. Right? And everyone knows that addiction to glucose is stronger than addiction to heroin. It's been quantified and shown. Okay, there's no qualms there. It's been published that addiction to glucose, because when rats were offered glucose, and I think they didn't do heroin, they offered them cocaine, glucose versus cocaine, rats preferred the glucose versus the cocaine. And the withdrawal from glucose is a lot worse than withdrawal from cocaine, believe it or not. Okay? So that addiction to glucose is really, really strong. It's not just glucose, it's all kinds of food, right? If you're in the habit of eating Cheetos, right, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, right? Believe me, every day you will want those Cheetos. Am I making sense? That's why it's very important to be watchful of what it is that you're eating. Okay? Everything's addictive. Fruits are addictive too. Okay? But they're healthy addiction. Right? They make you feel full, you get nutrients, and it helps with your health. Right? Unlike Cheetos. Right? So this diagram is really, really crucial. Okay? Autonomic nervous system is a big deal, and you already kind of know this. When we did the nervous system, I told you that parasympathetic was rest and digest. Correct? In fact, half of parasympathetic function is digest, right? Involved in digestion. Parasympathetic innervates every part of the GI tract. Are we clear? Mm-hmm. Everywhere. Okay? Pretty much all the way to the rectum, you're going to see parasympathetic. In fact, even the anus. Okay? Everywhere you have parasympathetic innervation. Mouth to the anus, parasympathetic goes everywhere. The vagus nerve is the most important of this all. Cranial nerve number 10. It's huge. Okay? On Facebook, I saw a beautiful dissection of the vagus nerve. Somebody had dissected a human vagus nerve and had posted a picture. And before I could take a picture of it or something, the whole thing crashed. And I couldn't take the picture, and I can't find it now. But it was absolutely beautiful, okay, with all of its branches. And to see how huge, it looked like a big carrot. Okay, it's that big, with all the branches coming off. So vagus nerve is huge. They synapse with ENS, which is enteric nervous system. So vagus nerve synapses with the ENS, enteric nervous system. No surprise. And some synapse directly with the glands and smooth muscle. In general, the parasympathetic nervous system will increase GI motility, okay, and secretion. You have similar connections with SNS, which is sympathetic nervous system, but you all know what sympathetic nervous system does. Sympathetic nervous system inhibits digestion, right? You have a bad dream, your mouth is dry, right? Because sympathetic halts digestive secretion. Are we clear? No big surprise, that's all old news. Now we're going to explore each part of the GI tract, okay? And again, the anatomical details you can ignore. I'm not going to ask you. The physiological details you need to know. So most of this is physiology anyway. So the mouth has teeth and tongue. I'm not going into teeth anatomy. I'm not going into tongue. I'm not going into any of these anatomical features. Just know that the teeth mechanically tear the food. They grind the food. They increase surface area. The tongue helps mix all of this with saliva. right? And you form a ball called a bolus, B-O-L-U-S, okay? So typically, you don't need to know this list of fauces, uvula, you don't need to know any of that stuff. Again, those are all anatomical details, okay? So what is the purpose of the mouth? Is to mechanically grind up the food and wet it with saliva, okay? Mix it all up, and then it pushes it to the posterior part of the mouth where the esophagus, there is a sphincter. Sphincters are very, very common in the GI tract. A sphincter is a tight, smooth muscle. Okay, it could also be skeletal muscle. Sphincter is tight muscle, okay? But most of the time it's smooth muscle. Here, the upper esophageal sphincter is skeletal. The upper esophageal sphincter, which is near the mouth, is skeletal because swallowing is voluntary. Okay, it gives you a choice to spit the food out if you don't like it. Salivary glands, you got 3 pairs of salivary glands. Again, I don't need you to know what those are. I will not ask you sublingual, submandibular, and parotid. I'm not going to ask you those. Just know that there are 3 salivary glands, 3 pairs of salivary glands, and they dump a lot of saliva into the mouth, particularly during the day. So at night, and the most important stimulation comes from talking, from movement of the mouth. Okay? The more you move your mouth, the more saliva you dump. Does that make sense? Because mechanically, the skeletal muscles squeeze the salivary glands to secrete things out. Okay? So salivary secretions increase during the day. That's why your mouth generally doesn't smell bad during the day, right? Compared to how it smells when you wake up. Particularly if you haven't brushed the night before and you had all kinds of salsa, right? All that onion, okay? The bacteria in your mouth love onion. Anything with sulfur, they love onion and garlic. That's why your mouth smells wonderful after you eat onion and garlic, okay? Because the bacteria in your mouth utilize sulfur. They're sulfur utilizing bacteria. And that sulfur metabolism is extremely important for your immune system. Because guess what your antibodies are made of? Sulfur. Antibodies have disulfide bridges. Okay? You need sulfur. If you're sulfur deficient, you're in deep trouble. Okay? And very interestingly, if you are into reading horror stories, right? One of the things that wards off evil forces is garlic. Correct? Garlic is the richest source of sulfur. It's actually metaphorical. The evil forces are diseases. Garlic is your sulfur central, right? And when you take in garlic every single day, your antibodies are very, very healthy and you're able to fight disease. Okay? Our ancient people might have been really, really religious, but they're not full of crap. Okay? What they say, they may say it in a different vein, but what they say is still valid. Am I making sense? So eat your garlic. Okay, very important. So in the presence of food, your saliva goes up, particularly if you're chewing your mouth. So this is also why when you chew gum, okay, your mouth stays fresh because there's a lot more salivary secretion. Okay. Too bad when you chew sugar-free gum, your insulin also goes up. So you gain at least 10 pounds. Okay, over a period of 4 months. On average, if you chew gum every single day. So chewing gum is not good for you, okay, overall. Okay, so if you want to keep your mouth fresh, put some mint leaves in it or something, I don't know, or chew on some cloves, okay, something natural that will not make your insulin go up, okay. Anyway, back to this. What does saliva do? It lubricates your food. Saliva has enzymes, it has water. Saliva also has antibodies. Saliva has antibodies. It has mucus. It has antibodies. It has a lot of immune proteins, okay, that fight diseases. So saliva is immune, okay? Very important. This is why mother animals will lick their young. Okay? You see big cows, and dogs do this too all the time, right? They lick their young, right? to give them all those antibodies, to give them that immune protection, right? The mucus in the saliva will give them a protective covering for the young. Because remember, young animals don't have their own defense, correct? So at least, I mean, most definitely in mammals. So what happens? Milk has a lot of antibodies, saliva has a lot of antibodies, right? So animals will lick their young. They're not just doing that out of affection and just to clean them. The significance is the young is getting a lot of immune protection, okay? At a time when they don't have their immune system fully developed, okay? Also, when you hurt yourself, okay, right, immediately tend to lick the wound, right? Because saliva has healing features. Saliva has a lot of fibrinogen, okay, and it really heals your wounds and it minimizes scarring. This is why you never see a lot of animals with huge scars, right? Because they always lick their wound and heal them so that the collagen layers will deposit more evenly and minimize scarring. Am I making sense? Yes. And there is a reason for that. When animals have scars, that's an indication that you're weak. So if you take a female lioness and she sees a lion with a big scar, she'll avoid it. She will not want to mate with him because he's weak. So scarring is a sign of weakness. So animals tend to not want that. Does that make sense? So it's a kind of an interesting phenomenon there. So saliva is 99.5% water, okay? And it has lysozyme, which we stole from viruses, okay? Lysozymes break down bacterial cell walls. They break down fungal cell walls, okay? We're surrounded by bacteria and fungus, even as we speak right now. So what's protecting our inside of our body from all these fungi and bacteria is the lysozyme in your saliva. Your tears have lysozyme too. That's why your eyes are not a bacterial frap house, okay? Because of that lysozyme. So, which is why if you don't wink, okay, your eyes will get infected eventually. Dry eyes will get infected, okay? Just like how moving your mouth causes saliva to secrete, winking your eyes will make tears secrete. Make sense?
You mean blinking?
Blinking. So if you stay put and you don't blink your eyes for several days, your eyes will get infected. Okay? Love that reaction. Okay. So carbohydrate breakdown begins in the mouth. This is why if you hold a piece of bread in your mouth for a little while, it'll start tasting really, really sweet because you've just started breaking it down to disaccharides. Okay? So starch gets broken down to disaccharides in the mouth. It doesn't stay in the mouth long enough to completely break down. Okay? Because you're almost immediately swallowing it, right? You don't keep it there that long. Salivary amylase is typically activated by chloride ions. Here's the first explanation of why we like salt, why we never get bored of salt. The chloride ions in the salt directly stimulate salivary amylase. Make sense? Parasympathetic nervous system increases salivation. This can be explained by, this can also explain why when you see a bun cake, my favorite bun cake, see a bun cake, you start salivating, right? Or you're sexually aroused, you start salivating. Where is that connection? Parasympathetic, right? Doesn't parasympathetic give you erection? Well, what's good for the goose, right? Parasympathetic will also make you salivate. And that salivation will lead to kissing. And kissing is nothing but exchange of saliva, and saliva in men has more androgens. I've already explained this to you before. Those androgens will kickstart the libido of the female. Okay, everything has a physiological reasoning. You just have to look for it. Okay, so parasympathetic stimulation of salivation is very, very important, not just for digestion, but also reproductive purposes. Are we clear? And the same parasympathetic will also activate insulin secretion from the pancreas. Which is why if you're hungry and you're staring at the bun cake but you can't eat it, okay, insulin's going to get secreted, right? And when blood sugar starts going down, you start getting hangry, a wonderful feeling of hangry. How many of you have been hangry before? Well, Angry Birds is always angry, that's different, but hangry, right? You're hungry and angry, right? Because one of the symptoms of hypoglycemia, initial symptoms of hypoglycemia, is anger. You want to become violent so you can go procure your food. Think of yourself as a wild animal, right? That anger and aggression will make you go get food, correct? It drives food procurement. So that parasympathetic stimulation, I can write a book on it in terms of how many things it does. Okay? Never think something is simple. Okay? It's never that simple. So if you were to be looking at the picture of food, right? This is also why even if you're not hungry, you start feeling hungry. Right? And there's this idea of, oh, I want to eat this even though I'm totally full or I'm not feeling hunger pangs. But if you dangle a bun cake in front of me, I'm going to want to eat it. Correct? Mm-hmm. Right? Most wild animals don't do that. Believe it or not. If a tiger has been fully fed, people have done these experiments, and you take meat to it, it's not going to want it. They have much better self-control. That's why you don't really see obese tigers. Correct? Mm-hmm. Humans have lost track of this. Not only humans, domesticated animals in general have lost this property. Okay, my dog, I don't care how if he's eaten only 10 seconds ago, if I give him something to eat, boom, he'll jump at it. Okay, I'm like, you cannot be hungry. You just ate a whole bowl of this nonsense. Okay, but domesticated animals are like that. Cats are like that too. Domesticated cats, but not wild cats. Very interesting. So wild cats have a lot of discipline. Okay, they will eat only when they're super hungry. And remember, when they're hungry, they're also angry. They have to be to go hunt, correct? They need that violence. Lingual lipase, that's the fat-breaking enzyme in our saliva. Our saliva also has lipase in it, which breaks down fat. It starts breaking down the lipids. Just starts, okay? Very initial. Okay, so this is what happens in the mouth. And again, none of these details I need you to know because this is all anatomy, okay? You don't need to know any of those details. I've left them there just for reference. Okay, so the functions of saliva, that you should know, and what kind of immunity it provides you, okay? Mastication, which is the act of chewing. That's why this muscle is called the masseter. Because it's the main muscle of mastication, this big chunk of muscle here, and that's what stimulates the salivary glands. The parotid gland is found right on top of the masseter. Okay? So, very, very, very interesting story. In 1981, there was a woman who went in with stage 4 breast cancer after all treatments had failed, right? She ends up going basically for radical mastectomy to get rid of both the breasts as a last sort of a means of hoping that the cancer goes away, or at least minimizes metastasis. Okay, our medical institutions, amazing medical institutions, completely get the surgery wrong. Instead, they remove her parotid glands. Okay, complete mistake, completely wrong surgery. Okay, happens. And they removed her parotid glands instead of getting rid of the mastectomy, right? And within a month, her breast cancer vanished. Okay? It was a complete error. She even sued the surgeons for doing the wrong surgery, okay? But and that led to a very, very important discovery. Saliva also contains growth factors. This is why animals lick their wounds and they lick their young. Right? Because you have growth factors. In fact, when cows graze on the grass, their saliva has these growth factors that makes the grass grow. And that was the only question I got wrong on my PhD qualifying exam. This 92-year-old guy, he asked me, he was the father of comparative endocrinology, Dr. Howard Byrne. That was the only question he asked me. He said, give me an example of a hormone that comes from mammals and affects plant growth. Obviously, I didn't know. And then he explained this to me, and I was amazed, okay? The epidermal growth factor that's in your saliva, okay, makes grass grow. Okay, so when people want to spit in the grass, that's physiological. Have you ever thought why people want to, when you see grass, you want to spit and you want to pee, and those are all nourishing the plants. It's nature's way of making sure you're giving back, right? Don't spit, that's nasty. I don't know why, I don't care how nourishing it is. But the bottom line is, what had happened to this woman was the breast cancer is completely dependent on EGF. And she was overproducing EGF from the parotid glands. So when they accidentally removed her parotid glands, the breast cancer went away. Make sense? So yeah, she was cured actually. And all the metastases all died. Okay, everything died, everything vanished. Okay, and she lived happily ever after. Okay. So, would you ever have imagined that your salivary gland will affect your prostate, will affect your liver, will affect your breast? Nobody imagines this. And it's through these accidental mistakes the best discoveries come about. Accidental, purely accidental mistake. Okay? When we have time, I'll tell you my accidental mistake. And that led to the biggest glory I could ever imagine. But it was completely a mistake. And I punished my undergrads for a year for doing this. Okay? Plucky reminds me of two of them. They all look like him. Completely, you know. Well, what do you expect? They work for me, right? So slave driving them. And I kept yelling at them saying, no, this is not right. This is not correct. Go repeat, go repeat, go repeat. And eventually I figured out that, oh my God, is this true? And then it turned out to be the best research project for me. Anyway, well, because they had accidentally converted mature adult cells to cancer stem cells. And they looked so artificial that I kept punishing them for it, saying, go repeat this experiment. No, this is wrong. Okay? Never ignore wrong results. Okay? You might be sitting on a Nobel Prize. And if I hadn't been working for UC, I could have gotten a big prize. But UC took all the patents, right? All patents by postdocs belongs to the UC. They're minting millions on this right now. Whereas I got the glory. Okay, where's my Prozac? All right, so yeah, I got zip. Okay, I got my name on the paper and the patent. That's it. No money. Anyway, but that's why I'm working here for dollars and cents. Bottom line, the lipase starts working in the mouth, and it's further activated by the acid in the stomach. Okay, the amylase, which breaks down starch, starts working in the mouth and stops working in the stomach. Stomach acid will halt carbohydrate digestion. Stomach acid stimulates fat digestion. Are we clear? So, I repeat, there are two enzymes in saliva. You have the amylase, which breaks down carbohydrate, and you have the lipase, lipid, right, breaks down lipids. Amylase is inhibited by stomach acid, and lipase is enhanced by stomach acid. Are we clear? So note that down. I will ask it on the exam. It's very important. We'll pause at the mouth, and let me ask you if you have any questions about the mouth. It's mostly salivary physiology. There's really nothing else there. So when you look at the cranial nerves, for example, cranial nerve number 5, and then cranial nerve number 7, I think, the facial, all of these have parasympathetic fibers. Okay? The nerves that go to your face have parasympathetic fibers, and their main function is to stimulate the salivary gland secretion. Are we clear? Good morning?
Yes.
Okay. On to the esophagus. Esophagus is a tube, okay? It's a muscular tube. It's a very short tube, okay? No digestion happens in the esophagus. no absorption happens in the esophagus, okay, because it's keratinized, no absorption, and no digestion. Are we clear? Okay, none of that happens. And remember, it's connected to corrosive stomach acid, correct? And we all know the kind of food we eat, right? Flaming Cheetos is enough to take a whole mucosa off of your esophagus, right? So you need protection there. Am I making sense? So you cannot, if you're going to be, I'm sorry, it is non-keratinized, but it is stratified squamous. It's several layers of epithelium because of the abrasive nature of food. Food is so abrasive that you want to make sure it's just like skin. You want several layers, but you're not keratinized because you're in the inside of the body. Okay? And the idea is the word ESO comes from the Sanskrit word ESO, meaning bridge. Bridge. ESO means bridge. Okay? And why? What is the significance of that word? In Sanskrit, ESO means the Lord. Okay? It's the bridge between beings and God. Okay? It's ESO. ESO, the bridge. So Latin stole that from Sanskrit. So ESO is bridge. Phagus is a pure Latin word meaning swallowing. Remember phagocytosis? Yeah. So this is the swallow bridge. Okay. Remember, in the Renaissance time, they didn't believe in direct naming of things. Right? It had to be metaphorical. Right? The more metaphorical it was, the more reward you got. Okay. So that's why these names are so all over the place, right? Like the esophagus. This is posterior to the trachea because breathing is more important. Okay. And it's an eating tube, basically. Begins at the laryngopharynx, okay, and it enters the mediastinal cavity and ends in the cardiac sphincter. Cardiac sphincter has nothing to do with the heart. You're not dumping your half-eaten bagel into the heart. Okay? Well, look at the name. It's the worst name they can come up with. Cardiac sphincter. The reason they named it the cardiac sphincter was when people felt heartburn, right? It felt like the heart was on fire, right? So it was named by location, right? But it's unfortunately a misnomer, right? That is the lower esophageal sphincter. So nowadays, people use that term. It's much clearer. The upper esophageal sphincter, or UES, and the lower esophageal sphincter, or LES. Okay? So cardiac sphincter is the lower esophageal sphincter. And when you eat spicy food, how many of you have heard of icy hot? Icy hot, you put it on muscle spring, right? Whenever you have a muscle sprain, you put it on there and you really massage it, right? Icy hot contains capsaicin. Capsaicin is the active ingredient in peppers, green peppers, right? So if you take green pepper, right, and you rub it, especially Thai chilies, and you rub it on your skin, it's going to burn the hell out of you, right? Because of capsaicin. What does capsaicin do? It relaxes smooth muscle. When you relax smooth muscle of blood vessels, what's going to happen? Vasodilation. Blood's going to rush there, and you're going to feel warm, or hot, or burning. Correct? So what does icy hot do? It makes your blood vessels dilate, you get a lot more blood there, and you repair whatever injury has happened there. Am I making sense? Or at least you feel relief. Am I making sense? What does this all have to do with lower esophageal sphincter? Well, when you eat the same peppers, what is it going to do? It's going to relax your sphincter. Sphincter is what? Smooth muscle. Hello, good morning.
Yes.
So if it's going to relax vascular smooth muscle, it's also going to relax the sphincter smooth muscle. Right? Mm-hmm. So what is that going to do? It's going to loosen the sphincter and stomach acid gushes up. And when stomach acid gushes up, it's that wonderful feeling, correct? Of acid reflux or heartburn. Yes? Mm-hmm. Okay? So the lower esophageal sphincter is very, very important. It loosens with age in 50% of the human population. Okay? When you're over 50, it just loosens. Okay? There is no rhyme or reason. And a lot of people have this misconception that people who eat really hot food, right, will get this loosened by the time they're 50, okay? Not a chance, okay? I mean, if you look at South India, this is very uncommon. And we eat hot food like you wouldn't believe, okay? So, no, that's not the case. It turns out to be simply genetic. Okay, 50% of the human population, the lower esophageal sphincter loosens. It just does, okay? And it's a very easy laser surgery where you tighten the lower esophageal sphincter, and then it's good as new. Okay, it's a very simple outpatient procedure, okay? So if you do get heartburn, don't go on Prilosec, because that's not going to cure the problem. It's only going to manage your symptoms, right? The best thing to do is to go to a GI surgeon and talk to them, do a quick endoscopy, and if your cardiac sphincter is loose, just tighten it up. It's a very quick procedure. It's a lot more protective of your esophagus, because if acid is refluxing to the esophagus every single day, you're asking for esophageal cancer, which is 98% fatal. Does that make sense? Think about the blood vessels going here. Okay? Hello, you're asking for metastasis. Are we clear? That's why thyroid cancer is so deadly, because of the location. Right? All your major blood vessels are going here. Right? You don't believe me, you don't want that. Okay? So good habits, okay, good food habits. Try, I mean, of course, you should avoid and not eat extremely spicy foods. I mean, that's a given, right? You have to balance your taste. But things like turmeric are extremely beneficial to the esophagus, extremely beneficial. And globally, actually, this pattern is changing now. But globally, at least in the 20th century, esophageal cancer was only reported in two populations. Okay, only in two populations: Caucasian populations and African American populations, not Africans, African American populations. And they had completely different esophageal cancers. Okay, Caucasians had much more epithelial, and African Americans had a totally different sarcoma, a totally different kind of cancer. And smoking and alcohol was the causative. Mm-hmm. So when people smoke, their risk is twofold to threefold. When you drink, and when I say drinking every day, talking about severe drinking, the risk is about threefold. When you smoke and drink, the risk is 1,550-fold. 1550. Okay, talk about synergism of risk factors. Okay, so smoking and drinking, particularly if you're white or African American, is not recommended at all. Okay, that will increase your esophageal cancer risk tremendously. Esophageal cancer is on the rise among other populations, other ethnicities, and the lowest is in the Chinese and Japanese populations. Extremely low, less than 0.1%. Because their food contains a lot of anti-inflammatory compounds. The food is so phytochemical rich that it highly protects you against all of these type of problems. So this is the anatomy of the esophagus. I don't need you to know the anatomy of the esophagus. I don't need you to know mucosa, submucosa, muscularis. I don't need you to know all of that. Okay? But I do need you to know upper and lower esophageal sphincters. Okay? That is something I need you to know. Because they will expand to allow the food in, and they'll expand to allow the food to go into the stomach. And there is no digestion or absorption or secretion, maybe with the exception of mucus. None of that happens in the esophagus. Esophagus is purely a conduction tube. It's purely a conduction tube. And it is highly innervated by somatic nerves for the skeletal muscle and by the vagus nerve for the smooth muscle. Remember, esophagus has both skeletal and smooth. Okay? Skeletal transitions into smooth as you go into the stomach. The fancy name for swallowing is deglutition. Okay? I absolutely need you to know this. Anytime you hear the word reflex, you need to know it. And we have hundreds of reflexes in this chapter. So the deglutition reflex swallowing involves 3 stages. You have the voluntary stage. Again, you can easily visualize this. The bolus is passed into the oropharynx. Okay. The pharyngeal phase, where you have the involuntary push of the bolus into the esophagus, okay, from the pharynx. Okay. So from the oropharynx into the esophagus, that's the pharyngeal phase. And the esophageal phase becomes involuntary. So actual esophageal phase of deglutition is the peristalsis of the food into the stomach. Okay? So how is all this mediated? If you have a reflex, you need to remember, it's not reflux, it's reflex. R-E-F-L-E-X. Okay? So remember, any reflex has a receptor, afferent pathway, integration center, efferent pathway, and effectors, correct? So this is no different. The receptors in the oropharynx will send action potentials to the deglutition center in the medulla of the pons. Okay? So do you see how incredibly rich the medulla is in its function? Yes? Medulla has cardioacceleratory, cardioinhibitory, vasomotor centers. Then this past Tuesday we saw respiratory centers, correct? Now you're seeing deglutition centers. Yes? So these are all very specific nuclei that deal with very specific functions. Are you seeing this? So the deglutition nucleus, okay, will send action potentials down to close the nasopharynx and open the esophageal sphincter near the mouth. How do you do that? You relax the smooth muscle, right? That's how you open the sphincter. Okay? And food goes in. The esophageal stage is characterized by peristalsis. I told you peristalsis is rhythmic squeezing, correct? And the food goes in. I want everyone to look through the esophagus. I'll give you 2 minutes. Look at your notes. Look through the esophagus and read through it and see if there's anything there I can re-explain. This is nothing like what you learned in anatomy, right? All kinds of reflexes, right? All kinds of physiological mechanisms. But very simple mechanisms. They're very common sense. Like, look at this one. This is totally common sense, right? If you're sensing food, you should open the upper esophageal sphincter, right? Very predictable. You see the notes? Okay. What part of my scribble is not clear? I see eye squinting, followed by a very bad facial expression, which means she's not understanding what I've written. I can read it for you. Tell me, what is it?
It's just REC.
Oh, receptors, yeah. Now I get to make that face. Any questions on the esophagus? Because stomach mechanisms get nastier because we're dealing with acid secretion. All your cell transport mechanisms are going to come back like an acid reflux. 5-minute break before we go into the stomach, okay? So take a break. When you come back, we'll go to the stomach. Yeah, no way of finishing this today. No chance. Continuing with the stomach, at least I'm hoping to finish the stomach today. And then we'll continue with the rest of the GI on Tuesday. So stomach connects the esophagus to the duodenum. The duodenum is the first part of the small intestine. So the stomach is a muscular bag that connects the esophagus to the duodenum, right? Its main function, people always think stomach's main function is to digest. It's not, actually. It's to store. So storage is the main function of the stomach. Secondly, immune. It gives you immune protection. Very little digestion happens in the stomach. Very little, okay? And we're going to see what specifically is digested and how. So remember, the stomach is a very compliant bag, meaning it can expand very easily, right? The reason is a lot of animals eat a lot faster than they can digest. Okay? This is why a lot of ruminants, right, cattle, they eat a lot, they store it in their stomach, they bring it back up, and then they chew the gut, right? So because their eating is a lot faster than they can digest, right? So you need a storage bag. So stomach is that kind of a bag. It's a mixing storage chamber. The semi-solid bolus is liquefied, right? And it's liquefied using an extremely acidic secretion, okay? This is it's even worse than battery acid, okay? So the stomach has all kinds of foldings. Those foldings are called rugae. And the folding will increase surface area a lot, like usual. But the folding also helps with churning. It helps you churn the food very efficiently. So what are the functions of the stomach? And what does it do and how does it get all that done? It secretes gastric juice. Okay, just like how the mouth secretes salivary juice, the stomach secretes gastric juice, which is extremely acidic. It contains hydrochloric acid, and very concentrated hydrochloric acid at that. And the purpose of HCl is to denature proteins. Okay? This will flatten out proteins like you will not believe. Okay? And the reason why you want to flatten the proteins, remember proteins have all kinds of unique shapes, right? And it's not easy to break them down if you're all completely shaped up, right? But this is one of the reasons why you flatten your boxes before you recycle it, right? Because it's easier to break down. Same idea, for you to chop the amino acids off of a protein, it's a lot easier if it's just a flat structure. Make sense? So the HCl gets that done. Its main job is to denature proteins. It also kills pathogens. I mean, things fry in the HCl. Okay? Not easy to escape from that HCl, except for a few bacteria that live in the stomach. They have adaptations that allow them to escape that HCl. And of course, the gastric juice also contains pepsin. Pepsin is an enzyme. Pepsin is an enzyme, and it breaks down peptide bonds. It breaks down peptide bonds. It breaks amino acid connections to each other. It breaks them up. Okay. Gastric juice also contains intrinsic factor. It's a very important protein that is important to absorb vitamin B12. Vitamin B12 is essential for any kind of mitosis. Vitamin B12 is really important for mitosis. And remember, we make 3 million RBCs a second, right? So if you have a problem with this vitamin B12, the first thing that shows up is your anemia, because red blood cells are the fastest growing in the body. Are we clear? But you will have more consequences if you're B12 deficient. And it also contains the lipase. The stomach has its own version of lipase. Remember that the lingual lipase that comes from the tongue is also activated by the stomach. So you have stomach's own lipase and then the lingual lipase. You need a lot of enzymes to break fat down. It's not easy. Okay? And eventually, all of this is regulated by many hormones and many neurons and many pathways. And we're going to be looking at those in detail much later. Okay? But we will. And you also secrete gastrin into blood. Now, gastrin is a hormone. Gastrin is not an enzyme, it's a hormone, so it's released directly into blood. It's endocrine. You absolutely don't need to know the stomach's 4 regions. That's all anatomy. You don't need to know that. And again, you don't need to know stomach histology either. But I do want you to know that the stomach's wall is arranged into gastric pits. This is important to know. It's arranged into gastric pits. And this is an example, or this is a small portion of the gastric pit, right? So here's the pit, right here. Okay? So you have all these epithelial cells, right? They secrete acid. Okay? Now obviously the stomach has to protect itself from the acid. But before we even get to that point, I want you to, again, I don't need you to know any of these parts here other than just identify the gastric pit. Okay? Gastric glands, okay, have 3 types of exocrine gland cells because they're secreting into the gastric pit. The gastric pit is technically the hollow of the stomach, and the hollow of the stomach is technically outside of the body. Correct? So these are exocrine secretions. Everybody follow the logic? The inside of the stomach is outside of the body, so it's exocrine. Okay? And makes sense. Do you ever want to secrete acid into the body?
No.
Right? So it makes sense. Okay? So you do need to know this table. Okay? You do need to know this table. So what are the different types of cells? You have plenty of mucus cells. Mucus cells, they secrete a lot of mucus. And when you're going through long-term stress, what hormone goes up during long-term stress? If you don't know endocrinology, the rest of this term is bye-bye, okay? So go back and review endocrine. What hormone goes up in long-term stress? Cortisol. Cortisol. Cortisol inhibits mucus secretion throughout the body, okay? So if you don't have mucus in your respiratory tract, you get pneumonia. If you don't have mucus secretion in your stomach, what does that do? The acid will burn your stomach walls. Am I making sense? Mm-hmm. The mucus is protecting you, right? This is why when someone's stressed out for a long time, they get peptic ulcers. Very simple mechanism. Cortisol prevents mucus secretion. No mucus, acid's going to burn. Question?
No.
Okay. So the acid is secreted by parietal cells. Parietal cells secrete acid, and we're going to see the mechanism of that. And they also secrete intrinsic factor, so they secrete both of those. Sheath cells secrete pepsinogen. I told you, O-gen, we saw fibrinogen before, right? O-gen means precursor, right? Inactive precursor. So pepsinogen is an inactive version of pepsin. Pepsin itself can break pepsinogen. Do you see that positive feedback loop? Remember thrombin breaking prothrombin? Right? Very similar, okay, same kind of situation. And then you also secrete lipase, which breaks fats, okay? G cells, okay, they secrete gastrin into blood, into the bloodstream. Remember, it's endocrine. And of course, you have your muscular layer, and the stomach has a very unique muscularis. The stomach muscularis is not 2-layered, it's 3-layered. You're going to see this again in the urinary bladder. You're going to see the same arrangement in the bladder. When you have 3 layers, you don't do peristalsis. Okay? So you have a circular layer, you have a longitudinal layer, and you have an oblique layer. And when all of them are contracting, what do? Churn. They churn. So movement in the stomach is neither segmentation nor peristalsis. I will ask this on the exam. It's neither segmentation nor peristalsis. Are we clear? Okay? It is churning. And that's exactly what the stomach's supposed to do. Okay? And of course you have your pyloric sphincter. So the stomach starts and ends with sphincters. It starts with the lower esophageal sphincter and ends with the pyloric sphincter, right? And they serve as locking mechanisms, right? Think about it. When you're churning your food, you want both those sphincters to be locked. Am I making sense? Again, table from Tortura. Really good book, okay? Really nice tables that summarize these kinds of things. So again, the muscularis, you have 3 layers, okay? And the oblique layer okay, that's wrong, because you have an oblique layer in the bladder also, okay? So correct that. So this is not the only place where you find the oblique layer. You find the oblique layer in the bladder, urinary bladder as well, which will churn the urine, okay? And you want urine to churn because you don't want crystallization. And crystals will tear the ureter as they come out, fun thoughts, particularly in males, right? Want a glass shard to be tearing the urethra? Yum. Okay, so yes, you have, everybody thank your oblique layer of the bladder. Okay, so serosa, you don't need to know this, it's anatomy, okay? So here's a little real picture. That's what a gastric pit looks like. SEM stands for scanning electron microscopy, and we have one of these in the Newark campus actually. Nice little compact electron microscope. The stomach mucosa, those are the pits. That's what the pits look like. And here are all the cells, and this is the histology. Again, this is all to be tested in anatomy, so I don't need you to know these. Yes? So this I need you to know. So what is actually functioning in the stomach? Because we're a functional science, right? We have to know the function. So food is usually pretty big, right? So it's not going to escape through the pyloric sphincter, right? Too big, size exclusion, okay? The fundus has very few peristaltic waves. Peristaltic waves begin and they intensify as you reach areas of the stomach. So what am I talking about? Peristalsis begins at the top portion of the stomach, and the stomach has its own pacemaker. It's called cells of Gehel, okay? So stomach has its own pacemaker, and the waves begin, okay? And they intensify as the waves come down. Obviously, the stomach cells all have to be connected by gap junctions. If the waves are coming down, waves of contraction, it's single unit smooth muscle. Of course, they have gap junctions. Good morning?
Yes.
Yes. So I told you, you're going to need to use all that pieces of information. So, and they intensify, okay, which leads to propulsion. Propulsion means pushing the food forward. You're pushing the food towards the pyloric sphincter. Make sense? But the pyloric sphincter is too small for the food to go through, right? So the food's going to reach the pyloric sphincter and come back. Okay?
Yes.
So large food particles are pushed back into the stomach. That's called retropulsion, very important. Retropulsion, going backwards. Okay? And several rounds of propulsion and retropulsion. This is possible only because of that oblique layer. If that oblique layer was not there, you'd be in deep trouble. Because food is going to squeeze itself out. Am I making sense? Before it's even mixed with chyme. Clear? So you want to make sure that food is really completely pulverized, is the correct word to use. The food is pulverized by the stomach. Okay? And yet you feel nothing. That's got to be amazing. Right? You're grinding up the food to little micro pieces, right? Like a blender, and yet you don't feel anything. Right? Incredible. So several rounds of this. Once the particles are small enough, you become pretty much a liquid, then you can pass through the pyloric sphincter. Okay? Why? Because when you go into the intestine, you don't want large food particles, right? You don't want, big ass Cheetos going through the intestine. You want them to be nice orange juice, right? To go through and then of course you absorb nothing because there's no nutrients. So it's all garbage, right? So things just go through, right? But the bottom line is gastric emptying will happen only if the food has been pulverized enough. Okay? Now, this could be a good thing or a bad thing. Okay? In all seriousness, if you eat a bag of Cheetos, gastric emptying will happen like that. Because it's corn flour. How hard is it to break down? Okay, let me ask you this. You pick up Cheetos. How hard is it to pulverize it with your fingers? Right? So think about your stomach, right? It's going to pulverize really quickly. So gastric emptying will happen very, very fast. And that's not a good thing. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. You want the food to stay there a little bit longer. This is why complex carbs are better. And when you mix your food with a lot of fat and protein, okay? I'll give you a real life example. Every night that I eat ice cream with my carbohydrate-rich food, anytime I have carbohydrate-rich food, I eat ice cream, okay? And I guarantee you my sugar is at least 70 units lower if I were to not eat the ice cream, because the fat slows down the gastric emptying. Am I making sense? Mm-hmm. Fat is too big, and it takes a long time to pulverize, right? Now, so then why don't you just eat fat day, night, and morning, day, and night? Well, that's not good either, because fat contains carcinogens. If the fat's going to stay in the stomach for 72 hours, all those carcinogens, right? That can't be good for you either. Am I making sense? Mm-hmm. So that's why you have to have the right balance. That's why you have a nutritional pyramid. Am I making sense? You have to have the right balance of all the foods. So gastric emptying, okay, and it's known that most fruits will delay gastric emptying. Okay, even though fruits don't contain fat, well, most of them don't. Avocados do, but many fruits don't really contain complex fat, right? But what happens is the fiber in the fruit, right, will help. That's why it's better to eat the fruit than drink fruit juice. Make sense? So eat the orange instead of eating the orange, and I can tell the difference. When I eat an orange versus when I drink orange juice, my blood sugar spike is instant when I drink orange juice. Whereas if I eat the orange, it will spike, but it takes a little longer, right? 15 minutes to 20 minutes longer than if I drank the juice. So fruit juices should not be preferred. You really should, even if it's pure 100%, okay? It's better to eat the fruit because you're getting some fiber with it, okay? Gastric emptying should not be rapid, okay? It should be somewhere between eating Cheetos or drinking fruit juice. And remember, people drink soda with it, right? Which makes the whole thing even more acidic, making gastric emptying even faster. Make sense?
Yes.
So you do not want to be doing that. Okay? Not at all a good habit. Versus eating pure meat. In the 90s, people did that with Atkins diet, right? That's all they ate was meat. It wreaked havoc on your GI system. Because meat stays in your GI tract 70 hours longer than if you were to eat pure salad. Does that make sense? This is why Africans have such a healthy digestive system. Okay? Things like colon cancer are unheard of in Africa because they eat so much grain and they eat so much wholesome vegetables with the meat. They eat a lot of meat. Of course they eat a lot of meat. But they're highly protected because they eat a lot of vegetables and a lot of grains along with the meat, which slows down the gastric emptying. Okay? And compared to pure meat, hastens the gastric emptying, bringing it into the perfect range. Am I making sense? We're supposed to eat both groups of food. So hydrogen and chloride ions are secreted separately, which is a very protective mechanism. We have a hydrogen-potassium ATPase. Why did we evolve potassium? Why couldn't we use sodium here? Slow. Potassium is slow. And do you want acid secretion to be slow or rapid?
Slow.
Slow. Isn't evolution beautiful? All hail evolution. Okay. And those are called proton pumps. Have you heard of proton pump inhibitors? I just mentioned one, Prilosec. Right? PPIs, proton pump inhibitors. Those are those proton pumps that we're talking about. Okay? Chloride and potassium diffuse into the lumen through apical channels. So what mode of transport? Apical channels. What? I begged you to look over cell transport. Nobody did. Channels? Channels, I'm not listening to you. People, channels, what mode of transport?
Facilitated.
You're going to die in the kidneys if you don't know your cell transport. For heaven's sake, please look through the cell transport chapter. Facilitated diffusion. Okay. Carbonic anhydrase, our best friend. This you couldn't have forgotten. I babbled about this last Tuesday. Carbonic anhydrase, remember? Okay. So carbonic anhydrase, which is in the cell cytoplasm, okay, converts carbon dioxide to hydrogen ions and bicarbonate. Bicarbonate chloride exchanger, remember this? Anion exchange protein? Yes, that's also found in the stomach. What does that do? It pushes the bicarbonate into blood while absorbing chloride into the cells. Am I making sense? It's an exchanger. And this causes what's called an alkaline tide, guaranteed on your exam. Alkaline tide. Bicarbonate is alkaline, right? You're pushing a lot of bicarbonate into blood, okay? And that helps us, correct? So if your stomach is not to function, people who go through gastrectomy, right, where they remove 3/4 of the stomach because people are obese, right? They go through gastric bypass. Look into gastric bypass. It's a very interesting surgery. The research hasn't come out, but I can promise you that they have all kinds of problems with buffering in the blood. Because 3/4 of your bicarbonate in the blood comes from the stomach. Am I making sense? So when you operate 3/4 of the stomach out, right, what they do is they take most of the stomach out and the stomach becomes a tube from the lower esophageal sphincter to the duodenum. Am I making sense? You're losing all these secretions. Always remember, removing something is never a good thing. Okay? Discipline your ass to eat less and exercise instead of going and getting bariatric surgery, right? When I went for bariatric surgery, thank God they have these regulations. When I went there for it, because I had a BMI of 36, I qualified for it, but they put me through hell. They said, if you don't lose 15 pounds, you don't qualify. And I said to them, if I lose 15 pounds, I'm happy. I don't need the surgery. And thank heavens I didn't. Because look at all the effects you're going to get. And when you go through bariatric surgery, forget about Advil. You cannot take any Advil. Okay? You have to take crappy Tylenol. Okay? Advil's a no-no. Advil becomes a poison. Okay? No NSAIDs can be taken by bariatric patients. Am I making sense? So you get through pain, you live through pain. God knows Tylenol don't work, right? So anyway, so remember, when you remove an organ like that, that can't be a good thing. It cannot be a good alternative. But alkaline tide is compromised, okay? So this is how the parietal cell secretes the acid. I want you to know this diagram completely. Okay, there are 10 exam questions in there, just in that one diagram. Okay, notice you have acetylcholine receptors. You remember acetylcholine? I don't believe you. You didn't remember channels. Acetylcholine, and then you have histamine. Okay, and then you have gastrin. Remember, gastrin is a hormone, correct? Now, all three of them will stimulate acid production. All three of them. Acetylcholine is your parasympathetic, correct? Rest and digest. And histamine and gastrin increases stomach secretion. That's why it's called gastrin, a hormone that increases stomach secretion. And histamine will also do that. And remember, histamine is involved in allergy response. This is why when you have bouts of allergy, you get acid reflux. Okay? Because of the histamine action. Okay? And many times insect bites can induce acid reflux also. Okay, because of histamine stimulation. Now, water and carbon dioxide is converted to carbonic acid by carbonic anhydrase. That should not be news. You know this from Tuesday. And then the hydrogen ion is pumped by the proton pump as an antiport with potassium. It's an antiport with potassium. Purposely, you don't involve sodium here. Sodium is too quick. Okay? And chloride goes passively, lusting after hydrogen. Correct? You all know this.
Yes.
Okay? And notice sodium is nowhere to be found here. Okay? Now, these three receptors will increase this process. Is that making sense? A lot. Okay, it will make acid production a lot greater. So, question is, how is the stomach protected from itself, from its own acid? Number one, you have alkaline mucus. Okay, tight junctions, very, very tight junctions. Things can't go through. So, can acid seep through?
No.
No, that's a protection mechanism. Stem cells are way at the base, right? Protected from the acid. They have no connection to the acid. And endocrine regulation, this is important, we'll go through this later, but if the pH becomes lower and lower, the stomach has a way of stopping the acid production. Okay? So there's the endocrine regulation there. And hydrogen and chloride are secreted separately, you just saw that. Right? The chloride comes out separately, the hydrogen comes out separately. Okay? And pepsinogen is only activated when needed, right? Because pepsinogen is also caustic. It's really bad for you. So you don't want that coming out as an active enzyme, right? It's going to start chewing its own proteins, right? So you secrete it as an inactive precursor, and then it starts working, okay? So those are all the mechanisms that self-protect the stomach, okay? So we will continue with the pancreas and the liver, and then the intestines on Tuesday. Lots and lots of mechanisms on Tuesday, so don't stay up all night on Monday. I'm looking right at you, Big Daddy. Because you won't understand a thing on Tuesday's lecture. Yes? In fact, watch my video, okay, on the intestine portion before you come on Tuesday. It will help. Okay? All right, so good luck on Tuesday, and I will have the review up for you by noon tomorrow. Okay?